The apartment was small, a living room cluttered with video game controllers, cigarette smoke hanging low, the television buzzing faintly in the background. Miguel sat slouched on a couch, restless. 2 of his friends had come by earlier, now it was just the 2 of them. When Marta entered, the conversation began calm but quickly turned sharp. Voices rose, furniture scraped against the floor. Neighbors later said they heard a loud thud, a sound so abrupt that even the street dogs barked in reply. Nobody thought to call the police. Nobody imagined that within minutes, a young girl's life had been violently taken. Outside, Seville went on breathing, cars passed, music played from a nearby bar, the hum of life indifferent to tragedy. Inside, Miguel panicked. The scene around him was chaos, a motionless body, a pool of blood beginning to spread across cold tiles, the echo of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He didn't know what to do, so he called for help, not the police, but his friend Samuel El Cuco Benitez, a miner known in the neighborhood for his recklessness. Together, they faced the unimaginable. They whispered, argued, and finally agreed, they had to make her disappear. Fear guided them more than reason. Every minute that passed deepened their crime, binding them together in silence. Later, they would drive through the narrow streets, searching for a place to leave her body, a place that would swallow the truth. Some say they went to the Guadalquivir River, others claim she was moved elsewhere. What's certain is that when the night ended, Marta del Castillo was gone, and her body has never been found. Her disappearance shattered Seville's sense of safety. The city, known for its warmth and laughter, woke up to a nightmare that would haunt it for years. The crime scene, that small apartment, became a symbol of everything dark that can hide behind ordinary walls. When the police finally arrived days later, they found no body, only stains scrubbed too clean, stories rehearsed too well, and eyes that refused to meet theirs. The morning after Marta disappeared, Seville was waking slowly, unaware that something irreparable had already taken place in its heart. Her parents, Antonio del Castillo and Eva Casanueva, thought she had stayed out late with friends, maybe lost track of time. Marta was responsible, but she was also 17, spontaneous, full of life, not one to worry her parents. But as dawn crept in and her phone went silent, unease began to spread through their apartment like a shadow. By noon, Antonio had called every one of her friends. No one had seen her since the night before. The last person to admit seeing her was Miguel, her ex-boyfriend. He told a simple story. She came over, they talked, and then she left around 9:30 p.m. to go home. It sounded ordinary, too ordinary. But her phone records told another story. After 9:30, her phone was never used again. The winter air of Seville hung heavy on January 24, 2009, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes the streets seem quieter than they are. The orange trees that lined the narrow avenues stood still, their fragrance muted beneath the cold. In a modest apartment building on Calle León XIII, lights flickered behind drawn curtains. It was here, behind those thin walls, that a 17-year-old girl named Marta del Castillo was seen alive for the last time. The evening had begun like any other for her, messages exchanged with friends. Plans to meet a boy she once loved, a simple walk that should have ended at home. But fate had other plans. Around 9 p.m., Marta's footsteps echoed through the cobblestones as she made her way to the apartment of Miguel Carcano, her ex-boyfriend. She trusted him enough to visit, believing old love could at least mean safety. Inside, however, the atmosphere was different. The air carried the weight of unsaid words, anger, jealousy, confusion, and in that fragile space between love and resentment, something terrible was about to unfold. Meanwhile, Miguel's calm began to crumble. At first, he kept his story straight. But as police started asking more questions, his mask slipped. Investigators noticed inconsistencies, his timeline was vague, his tone rehearsed. His phone data placed him nowhere near home when he claimed he was there. Detectives pressed harder. Then, under the pressure of hours of questioning, Miguel broke. What came out next would shock Spain. He confessed to killing Marta del Castillo. His voice trembled as he told them he had hit her with an ashtray after an argument, panicked, and with the help of his friend El Cuco, had disposed of her body in the Guadalquivir River. The confession spread through the police station like fire. Officers rushed to the river, divers plunged into the icy water, and news vans lined the banks by morning. 4 days, the river was searched, every rock, every shadow beneath the surface. But Marta wasn't there. That failure marked the beginning of Spain's most frustrating manhunt. The police were forced to rely on Miguel's changing stories, each version less believable than the last. In one, he claimed he dumped her body in a garbage container. In another, that his older brother helped him hide it in the countryside. Every time they chased a lead, they found nothing but confusion and contradictions. Miguel seemed to be playing a cruel game, confessing, retracting, inventing. And behind every false lead, the Del Castillo family waited, clinging to any hope that she might still be found. Antonio spent sleepless nights driving along riverbanks, landfill sites, and abandoned fields. Eva barely spoke, her eyes seemed hollow, fixed on a door that would never open again. The media descended on Seville, reporters from Madrid, camera crews, microphones thrust into every silence. Spain watched in horror as the story unfolded: a missing girl, a confessed killer, and a body that refused to be found. Weeks passed, and the city turned into a mirror of collective grief. Candles burned in the Plaza Nueva, where hundreds gathered nightly holding photos of Marta. Strangers cried together. Mothers wept for a girl they'd never met. The Del Castillo family appeared on television begging for information, their voices trembling but resolute. Antonio's words became iconic: "All I want is to find my daughter and bring her home." But home was now an impossible dream. The police realized Miguel had lied again. He changed his statement yet another time, now claiming that it wasn't him but his brother, Francisco Javier Delgado, who had helped move the body. It was the start of a tangled web of deceit that would trap not just the guilty but the entire justice system itself. Every lie pushed the truth further away, and every confession deepened the wound. Marta's absence was no longer just a tragedy, it had become a national obsession. By early spring 2009, 2 months after Marta's disappearance, Seville had turned from a city of orange blossoms into one of suspicion and grief. The narrow streets where people once gathered to laugh were now echoing with murmurs of disbelief. The case had taken on a life of its own. Every news broadcast, every cafe conversation revolved around the same haunting question: where is Marta? What had started as a personal tragedy had become a national obsession, a wound open in full public view. The police, desperate to piece together the truth, had turned their focus to Miguel Carcano's circle, a small group of friends who seemed to share a dangerous loyalty and a disturbing silence. Among them were El Cuco, the underage accomplice, Francisco Javier Delgado, Miguel's brother, Maria Garcia, Javier's girlfriend, and Samuel Benitez, another friend who'd been seen with them that night. Each of them claimed ignorance. Each pointed at someone else. Together, they built a web of contradictions so tight that it trapped even the truth itself. The first major trial in 2011 was supposed to bring justice. Spain watched as Miguel, wearing a blank expression, was led into the courtroom. Cameras clicked, his face was everywhere, emotionless, unrepentant, the face of a crime that had left a country sleepless. Across the room sat Antonio and Eva, Marta's parents, their grief carved into silence. They didn't need to speak, their eyes said everything. They wanted one thing only: to know where their daughter's body was. The prosecution presented the confession, the forensic traces of blood found in Miguel's apartment, and the testimony of those who had heard bits of truth from him in prison. But then Miguel changed his story again, claiming now that he hadn't killed Marta alone, that his brother Javier had struck the fatal blow, and that the body had been buried somewhere outside Seville. The court froze. It was yet another version, another lie. But the damage was done. The defense seized on the inconsistencies, arguing that if Miguel couldn't keep his story straight, no one could know what really happened. What should have been a trial for murder became a theater of confusion. During the proceedings, El Cuco, being a minor at the time of the crime, was tried separately in juvenile court. His case enraged the public even more. Despite evidence placing him at the scene, he was convicted only of covering up the crime and sentenced to a short stay in a youth facility, a punishment that many saw as insultingly light. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse chanting for justice, waving posters of Marta's face. "Queremos la verdad," "We want the truth," echoed through Seville's streets. But truth was nowhere to be found. Miguel, now facing life in prison, refused to reveal the body's location. Javier and the others were acquitted, their involvement labeled unproven. Antonio stood outside the courthouse that day, surrounded by cameras and microphones, his voice shaking but resolute. They may have fooled the system, but they will never escape their conscience. My daughter is still out there, and I will find her. The verdict sparked outrage across Spain. Newspapers called it a failure of justice. Talk shows debated the flaws in the legal system. How could someone confess to murder, name accomplices, change stories multiple times, and still walk free of the most serious charges? Forensic experts questioned the handling of evidence, how traces in the apartment had been cleaned, how crucial hours were lost early on, how the body had never been recovered despite so many confessions. Each revelation deepened the wound, not only for the Del Castillo family but for every parent watching at home. Marta's absence had become symbolic. She was no longer just one girl, but every daughter who might walk out one night and never return. Antonio and Eva turned their grief into activism, pushing for reforms, organizing searches, appearing on television to keep the case alive. Theirs was a grief that refused to fade, a love that refused to surrender to lies. By the end of that year, Miguel had been sentenced to 20 years in prison for Marta's murder, a sentence that should have felt like victory but didn't. Without a body, without closure, justice felt incomplete. The empty chair at the Del Castillo dinner table was still there, untouched, unbearable. Antonio once said in an interview, "Every night, I imagine her calling out for us, and every night I promise I'll keep looking." That promise became his life's mission. Even after the cameras turned away and new stories captured the headlines, Antonio could still be found walking along the riverbanks or digging through desolate fields with volunteers. Sometimes, he'd stop, look at the horizon, and whisper her name as if the wind might answer. But the river kept its secrets, and Seville kept its silence. As months turned into years, the name Marta del Castillo became more than a memory, it became a wound carved into Spain's conscience. Every time the news mentioned her, the nation seemed to pause. In Seville, the Guadalquivir River, once a place of laughter and sunlight, became a symbol of torment. Divers had scoured its depths dozens of times since that first confession. The current had carried away countless possibilities, but Antonio still stood on the banks, day after day, watching the dark water flow past as if it might one day give her back. Sometimes he brought flowers. Sometimes he just stood in silence, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling. Around him, volunteers from across Spain came to help, people who had never met Marta but felt her absence as their own. They brought drones, dogs, machinery, anything that could give the family even the smallest chance at closure. Yet every search ended the same way, with emptiness. The frustration was unbearable. Every few months, Miguel would send a new message from prison, offering another version of events, another supposed location of the body. The police would rush to dig their landfills, wells, construction sites, farmland on Seville's outskirts only to find nothing. Each lie felt like another crime. It was as if Miguel had learned that keeping Marta's location secret was the last shred of power he held over the world outside. And so he used it cruelly, playing with the pain of a family already destroyed. "He's killing us again and again," Eva once said in an interview, her voice breaking. "Every time he lies, I have to bury her all over again." Her words resonated deeply with mothers across the country, igniting an anger that transcended the case itself. Spain wasn't just mourning Marta, it was mourning the idea that justice could fail so completely. Public outrage reached its peak in 2012 when new searches at the Camas landfill yielded nothing after weeks of grueling excavation. Over 100 workers sifted through mountains of waste, hoping to find even the smallest trace, a shoe, a piece of clothing, a bone. Antonio was there every day, watching, helping, refusing to leave until the last truck stopped moving. When it was over, he faced the cameras once again, tears streaming down his face. "They can close the landfill, but I will never close this search." His determination turned him into a national symbol of persistence, a father who would not let the system forget his daughter. Social media erupted with campaigns, #Todos somos Marta, we are all Marta, #Justicia para Marta, and thousands of posts demanding legal reform. Citizens organized candlelight marches in cities across Spain. In Madrid, Nearly 500,000 people filled the Puerta del Sol, chanting her name into the night. Behind the scenes, the police tried everything. Psychological profilers studied Miguel's behavior, hoping to decode the truth buried under his contradictions. They said he was manipulative, narcissistic, a man who craved control even from behind bars. He thrived on the attention. Every headline, every search renewed his relevance. The authorities knew he might never tell the truth, yet they had to keep chasing every lead. New technology, sonar scans, and ground-penetrating radar were used to explore the riverbeds and rural fields. But Seville's soil refused to give her up. Years later, the Guadalquivir would still be dredged, not because they expected a miracle, but because giving up meant admitting defeat. And for Antonio, defeat was not an option. "If I stop searching," he said once, "it means I've accepted that she's gone. And I can't. Not until I bring her home." Meanwhile, Spain's legal system was under fire. Journalists and lawmakers debated what many now called the Marta del Castillo effect. How could the justice system convict someone of murder but allow accomplices to walk free, even when their lies had obstructed the search? Parents feared that the same could happen to their children. Parliament sessions grew tense. Politicians cited Marta's case in heated arguments about sentencing reforms. Eventually, the outrage led to new discussions about increasing penalties for concealment of bodies and false testimony. Marta's case had become a catalyst for change, but for Antonio and Eva, reforms meant little. They didn't want laws, they wanted their daughter. Every reform, every speech in her name, was both an honor and a reminder of what had been taken from them. By 2014, 5 years after her disappearance, the search had spanned rivers, farmlands, quarries, and countless wells. Miguel, still imprisoned, gave yet another statement, claiming this time that he had buried Marta near La Rinconada, outside Seville. Again, the police searched. Again, nothing. The pain had become a ritual: hope, search, disappointment, repeat. Yet, somehow, the family endured. Eva said she still set a plate for Marta at Christmas. Antonio visited her school every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, leaving flowers by the entrance gate. She should have graduated, fallen in love, traveled, lived, he once said, looking at her old classroom. Instead, all she's done is remind Spain that evil can wear the face of someone you once loved. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest truth of all. By the time the calendar turned to 2015, 6 years after Marta's disappearance, Seville had changed, but not in the way cities are meant to. The cobblestone streets still shimmered in the evening sun, the scent of orange blossoms still floated through the air. But beneath that beauty lived a quiet heaviness, a collective scar that refused to heal. Everyone in Spain knew her name. Children grew up hearing about her. Parents used her story as a warning whispered through tears. The case had long stopped being just a local tragedy, it had become a national lesson in justice, sorrow, and resilience. For Antonio and Eva, every day since that night in January 2009 had been lived in fragments, part memory, part search, part battle. The police might have closed their active files, but the parents never did. Marta's bedroom remained untouched, her photos still smiled from the walls, her laughter still echoing in videos that Antonio could barely watch anymore. "She's frozen in time," he once said softly in an interview, "while we're forced to keep moving." After the verdict, Spain's legal system had faced harsh criticism. Many believed the courts had failed Marta by allowing those who lied or helped conceal the crime to walk free. Antonio and Eva began to channel their grief into activism, turning their personal tragedy into a public mission. They demanded reforms so that no other family would suffer through the same agony. They appeared on talk shows, in schools, and even in parliament sessions. Eva, once a quiet and private woman, now spoke with an unshakable strength. "We are not just fighting for Marta," she said, "we are fighting for truth, for every daughter who never came home." Her words carried weight. She had become the voice of mothers who had lost everything but hope. In 2013, the family founded the Association Marta del Castillo, a foundation dedicated to helping other families of missing persons. It provided emotional support, legal aid, and, most importantly, visibility, something Antonio understood too well was essential in a world where time makes people forget. Their persistence paid off. Thanks to public pressure and the family's relentless advocacy, Spanish lawmakers revisited sections of the criminal code, leading to debates on tougher penalties for obstruction of justice and for those who conceal bodies. While not all reforms passed immediately, the discussion alone marked a profound shift. Marta's name had reshaped Spain's sense of justice. But for the del Castillo family, no law could bring back what was lost. Antonio often said, "Justice without truth is not justice." He meant that every day without finding Marta's remains was another day of injustice. He continued to search personally, walking through empty fields, scanning riverbanks, digging in places the police had long abandoned. Volunteers came and went, but Antonio never stopped. "I promised her I would bring her home," he told a journalist once, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. And a father's promise is sacred. As the years went by, Miguel's silence became almost unbearable. Occasionally, rumors emerged that he was considering revealing the truth. Each time, the media descended on the prison like vultures, desperate for any new headline. Each time, it ended the same, with nothing. Miguel's behavior in prison was described by guards as erratic, sometimes withdrawn, other times arrogant and taunting. He had become a ghostly figure, haunting the nation with the power of what he refused to say. In interviews, Antonio would speak about forgiveness not because he felt it, but because he wanted peace. "I want to forgive him," he said once, "but how can I, if he keeps torturing us with lies?" His voice carried the fatigue of a decade-long battle. Yet beneath it, there was something stronger than anger, love, the kind that refused to surrender. Public empathy for the del Castillo family never faded. On every anniversary of Marta's disappearance, thousands gathered in Seville's Plaza Nueva holding candles and white flowers. Streets filled with silence as her name echoed through the crowd. Even strangers who had never known her wept openly. Each vigil was both an act of mourning and a protest, a reminder that Spain had not forgotten. Over time, Marta became a symbol not only of loss but of endurance, a light for families still searching for their own missing loved ones. Her parents' courage inspired documentaries, books, and songs. Spanish artists painted murals of her face on city walls, her smile, frozen in youth, watching over Seville. To outsiders, it might have looked like closure. But for Antonio and Eva, every tribute was a reminder that the story wasn't finished. The media's interest eventually dimmed, as new tragedies took its place on the front pages. But those who had followed Marta's story from the beginning knew that this case had changed something deep within Spain. It had forced the country to look at its justice system, its media, and its compassion. It had exposed how fragile the line is between hope and despair. Antonio once described it perfectly: "They think this story ends when the cameras go away. But for us, it never ends. We live inside it, every second." And in that haunting truth lies the essence of the Marta del Castillo case, a crime that didn't just take a life, but reshaped a nation's conscience forever.